last time, I have been speaking about stability and spaciousness as our two main supports on the path, but being really rooted in our bodies, and through that being also rooted in the earth as an anchor for opening our minds, for becoming aware of awareness. And through that, connecting with the wisdom and compassion of the Dharma as our guidance in these times of, great challenges and uncertainty. And, one of the classic templates in the early Buddhist teaching is what's called the Noble Eightfold Path, which starts with right view or right understanding. And in the Pali language, it's called samaditi. And today I wanted to, speak about that. But before going deeper into right understanding, I would like to just also mention the remaining 7 components of the path. Just go over them once. And you can just, settle in where you are sitting and let that basically rain on you. Just let it, drop into you. I'm going to first present it in Pali, the ancient language in which the early Buddhist teachings have been laid down, by chanting them, those 8 components, and then read them in English as well. Samma Ditti, Samma Sankappa, Samma Vacha, Samma Kammanta, Samma Ajiva, Samma Vayama, Samma Sati, Samma Samadhi. Samma Ditti, Samma Sankappa, Samma Vacha, Samma Kammanta, Samma Ajiva, Samma Vayama, Samma Sati, Samma Samadhi. And in English, that's Samadhi is right understanding. Samma Sankappa, right thought. Samma Vacha, right speech. Samma Kammanta, right action. Samma Ajiva, right livelihood. Samma Vayama, right effort. Samma Sati, right mindfulness. And Samma Samadhi, right stability of mind, sometimes also translated as concentration. So those, those 8 strands of the Noble Eightfold Path, they are functioning together as a very strong cable we can use, as we are responding to these very challenging times of great uncertainty. And the Noble Eightfold Path is considered to protect us from our own greed, hatred, and delusion, and also from the greed, hatred, and delusion of others. And that's a really important support, to hold on in these times of great challenge, so that we actually can dare to enter into the field by having this cable, to help us, to keep us going in the right direction. Just when we are, in Austria, there are some mountains and when you walk onto those mountains at certain points, when it gets very difficult, then there is those cables you can hold on to, a rope sometimes. And that keeps us steady and going in the right direction. If it's difficult and we need to slow down, but there is something there we can rely on in the midst of the storm. And the first component is samadhi or right view, and that helps us, to clarify where we are coming from, our motivation. And that's of paramount importance, to know where we are coming from, to clarify that before we are stepping out into saying something or doing something. So shifting away, from the strong urge, to do something, just in order to do something, just in order, to get rid of the energy, and acting out, reacting rather than responding from that need, of just like following the urge of acting. So, shifting away from being a savior to being a healing presence, that's what the Noble Eightfold Path is here for. And, to understand the importance to start where we are versus just prioritizing external action. That's really what I want to speak today about. So the balance between being and doing. And, we all know how difficult it is, if we feel this sense of urgency, to do something. And then we really need to check in with ourselves and see, is that a sense of urgency which is just like a trauma pattern, which is triggered, through a situation, or is there really something beneficial, something wholesome we can contribute to a situation, and know the difference. And that, for that we need to stop, for that we need to slow down and turn inwards first. And, samadhi or right view can really help us to discern. And there are two kinds of right view, and both, recondition the mind and the heart and help us to develop a different kind of perception. A perception which goes in direction not harming, doing what is wholesome, and awakening, awakening out of the dream of delusion. So that's what right view is all about. And then, there's two kinds. The first one is conventional or mundane right view. And the second one is ultimate or super mundane right view. And we need both of them. It's like cultivating a binocular vision where we are having both views in our practice. So conventional or mundane right view speaks about, that there are results for wholesome and unwholesome actions. So there's a difference between wholesome and unwholesome deeds by body and speech. There's generosity, there's giving, there's responsibility towards family and society. It's all about, embodied life and about, the repetition compulsion of trauma or karma. I think it's a very similar principle. And then an ultimate or super mundane right view speaks about, the transcendent practice of what's called the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths, have been laid out by the Buddha like a template which was used in ancient Indian medicine at his time, and I think is still used today. And that says, first it looks at what is the illness. That would be the first noble truth, that there is suffering. And, classically it has been described as sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. That's what you can read in the suttas as the definition for suffering. So there is an illness, and in the context of the Four Noble Truths, the illness is called suffering. And then the origin of suffering is the second noble truth. And this is what's been in terms of an illness, that would be the virus. And the virus is grasping and clinging, attachment. And then the end of suffering, the third noble truth, would be health, complete health. And that is defined in early Buddhist teaching as nibbana or nirvana, full awakening from delusion, from ignorance. And then the prescription is the Noble Eightfold Path. That's the fourth noble truth. That's the path which gets us to this full health, the treatment. And, we get a prescription from the doctor, but then we really need to follow it. The prescription is simple. It's the Noble Eightfold Path, but then to follow it, to live it, to be it, is something, we need to train over our whole lifetime and probably other lifetimes. So, as soon as there is right view, in particular, ultimate right view, the whole path comes into vision, comes into view, and then, leads us to the next component, which is right thought. And I plan to speak about that next time. So right view, is at the beginning, and usually, through this evolutionary urge in ourselves, that we feel called to evolve in order to respond more fully, in order to open our hearts and our minds more fully, that usually brings us into contact with some kind of teaching which helps us to see things in perspective. And in terms of the Buddhist teaching, that would be the Noble Eightfold Path, which starts where we are right now, by developing right view. So whenever we are feeling a sense of urgency, a sense of contraction, a sense of needing to do something or needing to say something, we come back first to ourselves and see, what is underneath, what is there, what are we holding on to. And, usually that is experienced as unpleasant. And then remembering, the obstacles are the way. The obstacles are not in the way, but the obstacles are the way. And this very, urge of wanting to be somewhere else than where we are, that can become our entry gate into the path. By really stopping and connecting with that, and holding steady with that, and being okay, and being accepting with that, with the unease of this, with the discomfort, really. And so much, about the path is to learn to be okay with the discomfort of our own bodily experience, and then, making space around that, digesting what is underneath, being with the trouble, sitting in the mess, and from that, then allowing it to unravel, and allowing the mind to open up more and more. And through that opening, the capacity to connect with the Dharma will flourish. And then we will know what to do. We will know how to respond. So, importance of being able to sense and feel our lives, the highs and the lows. That's the starting point for acting. And this is, what's different from knee-jerk reactions, by just doing something in order to feel better, doing something so we can say we have been doing something, and really not so much caring about the results. So just, dropping into the body and sensing how you are right now, today. It's for many of us, it's still the beginning of the day here on the West Coast. Sitting here and knowing, there's so much going on out there in the world. It becomes more and more clear that we have reached, the limitations of what the planet can support. We need to turn things around significantly, the way we live, the way we organize ourselves, and the huge complexity of that. And the fact, that we basically don't know how to come into coherence, because there's so many different needs and views, and so much, past causes and conditions which are bearing fruit, and it seems all to be completely out of control. And it is out of control because it can't be solved with the dualistic thinking mind of just one viewpoint. There is 8 billion plus viewpoints. And we need to find a different approach. And the first place to start is to remember the motivation which brings us to this gathering here, where we want to build a vessel, a container to invite the Dhamma, and to invite, past and present and future generations to work together. Standing on the shoulders of our ancestors who have developed these amazing bodies over billions of years. Being together as this group of, we're about 21 people right now. And then there's also the future generations, which haven't come yet, but which are also present in some different realms than this one. And in all of the modern human presences. As soon as we open our minds to all of these intelligences, they will respond. This is a very subtle practice. Intention is very much the forerunner, of what is possible. And right view shows us, where we are grasping, where we are holding on, where we are still in the past. And then, underneath that, we can sense the willingness in our own bodies, our willingness, to make ourselves available, to develop further what we have received. So we can hand it over to future generations, including a planet which can accommodate our species. And we have to really adjust. And checking in what that brings up, maybe somebody feels some sort of fear, some doubt. Maybe that's all just delusion. Yeah, like wanting to go back to be taken care of, by some father figure, the whole patriarchal mindset, which is really falling apart because we have outgrown that, the need for having a parent. And all of the trauma, which we have incurred in our own childhood, all of the trauma, which has been passed down over generations. Which we now, still project onto the planet as being a being which doesn't need anything for themselves. There's just so much dissolving of old limitations and these old systems starting to show more and more cracks. And rather than desperately trying to glue them together, we are just paying attention to what comes through the cracks and allowing it all to recycle and reshape. So really working on our perception of right and wrong through applying right view, which basically says, grasping is the origin of suffering. And life itself is a constant flow. And whenever we grasp at it, it's going to bite us because it can't be nailed down. But we can flow with it. We can swim along with it. That's something we can do. And sometimes we are tired, we can't swim, then we just allow ourselves to be carried by the flow. And then again, we can. And then we do. And learning to connect with all of the supports which are there, the community, the Sangha, not just human, but the more than human community, which keeps us alive. And just also noticing your own connection to that community. There's already some kind of resonance there, because otherwise you wouldn't have come here to this meeting. You had to, organize yourself to be here. So honoring that knowing in yourself. That awareness, there is something calling you, means you already know something. You already know that there is a path. Otherwise you wouldn't have come here. And the Buddhist path is just one amongst many paths, but it's one which also works. And it's quite pragmatic and has this very clear, meditation teaching, which can help us to fine-tune the mind and the heart so that it can use that Noble Eightfold Path, that cable, in order to stay on the right track. Even, the storm, the sacred shitstorm is starting. But even in a sacred shitstorm, we can walk the Noble Eightfold Path. With this binocular vision of knowing the difference between wholesome and unwholesome in terms of action in the world. And also, knowing where we are coming from. If we are coming from grasping and clinging, or if we are coming from acceptance and presence. The balance between doing and being. We need both. And through that, we will be able to express our purpose, our contribution, our gifts, the medicine, which we are bringing to the mix, why we have come. As we are expressing our medicine, we are also receiving more and more of the information which comes to us through the web of life. Or we can call it the Dharma. There are so many ways. So that calling, is a spiritual resource for our own healing work and for the healing of the world. That, capacity to identify value and truth, and then act on it. Not from a place of desperation and contraction, but from a sense of devotion and service. Being more or less like a channel for something to move through us, rather than wanting to get rid of pressure. It's more like, giving a gift which doesn't belong to us, but which comes through our own gifts. Really, kind of attuning to that calling by sensing into it. That's something we can do together, because usually, in community, that connection with that sense of calling gets amplified. This, evolutionary urge, which is inherent in life. And I think there are phases where it gets stronger, when we come to these bottlenecks, such as the bottleneck we are now already entering, through the limitations of the biosphere, meeting the huge amount of extraction and the unsustainable ways of conducting business for over 8 billion people, which the planet cannot sustain. It simply doesn't have the means. So that's the bottleneck, which puts pressure on everything else. And then, we have these explosions of violence and despair as we see them in the Middle East, in the Ukraine, and in some of the African countries. And who's going to be the next? The pressure is going to build up. We need to learn to work with that pressure, to see, where is the opening where we can actually do something. Surely not by throwing bombs and destroying lives or destroying cities. That's crazy. response. But by really seeing the grasping to the past, which is not sustainable, it just has to change. Transition is asking for transformation. There's no way around it. And we need to start with our own transformation. Otherwise, we are just stuck in this repetition compulsion. Which is called samsara in the Buddhist teaching. There's even a perfume on the market, you know. It's called samsara. I don't think they knew what they were using, you know. They really didn't know understand the meaning because it's not very attractive. To be caught in competition, in repetition compulsion is not the kind of perfume I would like to use, if any. So that's a really good example, actually, you know, of delusion and waste of time. And still, you know, it makes a good presentation inside of the consumerist battle. So times are urgent. We really need to slow down and look at where this is all coming from. Where does it all start? It certainly starts, you know, with us, with our own minds, with our own habits, with our own outmoded perceptions. And that's where we can start to make a difference. Otherwise, we're just going to make it worse. The solutions are not to be found on the same level of consciousness which created the issues. We need to drop deeper. We need to be willing and do the prep work, to not just blindly run into action, just to feel better for a moment. Moving the deck chairs on the Titanic endlessly until it sinks. So listening into the silence of the mind, the spaciousness. and sensing the vibrancy, the fullness of that emptiness, the fullness of possibility. If we don't clutter it all up with past habit, and trusting that unmanifest wisdom and compassion to inform us. But just, allowing that spaciousness, relaxing with the out breath into that spaciousness, which is not ending at the walls of the room we are sitting in, but it constantly expanding as we are sitting here. And then, becoming aware of that which knows about the spaciousness. Awareness of awareness. Like dropping the perception of spaciousness and allowing the mind to make a new U-turn, looking at itself, becoming aware of its capacity to reflect, like a mirror which effortlessly reflects any object in front of it. Becoming aware of that capacity for knowing without doing anything. That which knows is not limited. And then there's those limited objects which arise and cease in the knowing. And we want to shift our identification from the objects which are arising and ceasing to the knowing itself. That is the refuge in Buddha. And by being in that knowing, we can invite the wisdom and compassion to inform us. It's like raining down on us. Without grasping or clinging, without language, without words, but it is a transmission which comes through sitting in that openness. And sensing the vibrancy, the fullness of emptiness, the fullness of potential. That can only be felt and sensed if the mind is not clinging to anything, if the mind is wide open rather than contracted. That's a taste, of the goal of the practice, which my first teacher, Ajahn Buddhadasa, called it a little nibbana, the temporary liberation of the mind. And then, being able to sense into that vibrancy of that unmanifested wisdom and compassion, which can inform us if we can stay open. So sensing the vibrancy. The fullness of emptiness, the fullness of potential, if we can stay open to it. And that's the only way how we can really midwife a future which isn't a repetition of the past, but something which is organically emerging. And as we are standing on this threshold, with so many things falling apart. And out of that compost, the new life is going to come forth. Like it does, every spring in the gardens, in the forests, We are not different from that. And then we're coming slowly back again, to the body by allowing the breath to, connect us deeply into the body, sensing the earth underneath us.